You know, Martin Scorsese gets a bum rap. Despite being labeled as the guy who does the mafia movies, he actually has a lot of range. Biopics, sports movies, even a freaking musical rom-com. So why do so many people think he can only do movies about Italians doing organized crime? In his defense, he also does a lot of movies about the Irish doing organized crime. And I'm not even going to talk about his two most famous ones today. Welcome to Silver Screen Prints, where I make t-shirts based on my favorite movies. Today I'm drawing a design based on, perhaps, my favorite movie character of all time, played by possibly the greatest living actor of all time, in what I consider to be Scorsese's most underrated film, The Gangs of New York. Oh, and if you haven't seen it, fair warning, there's going to be some spoilers. And by some, I mean the entire video. I just realized as I'm recording this that all my favorite movies seem to be about sons avenging their murdered fathers. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch my first episode where I discuss Conan the Barbarian. So yeah, that's how the movie starts off. Liam Neeson, who plays the father of a young Leo DiCaprio, aka Amsterdam, gets murdered by Daniel Day-Lewis, aka Bill the Butcher Cutting, in an 1840s version of a Bloods vs. Crips street melee. And while I'm not sure there was any real-life version of Priest Vallon, Bill Cutting is based on the very real William Poole. I won't be talking about him because there are a lot of good videos that go in-depth on that topic. For the purposes of this video, all you really need to know is that he was America first before America first.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems. And they're bringing those problems with us.
You think I'm gonna help you befoul his legacy? By giving this country over to them what's had no hand in the fighting for it? Why, because they come off a boat crawling with lice and begging you for soup?
I originally thought about doing an entire video comparing Trump and Bill the Butcher, but I didn't want people to get the wrong idea about my politics. Anyway, in the case of the fictional Cutting, he was a member of the American Federation of Native Americans, which was the movie version of the real-life Bowery Boys. Which is weird because there was already a gang called the Bowery Boys in the movie, so why wasn't he just the leader of that gang? Regardless, the whole beware foreign influence sentiment was the same. And in this case, the immigrant group that was blamed for most of the ills of New York City at the time was the Irish. This may come as a surprise, but it turns out that America in the mid-19th century, like every civilization before it and after it, has always scapegoated the newest group of mass migrants. And while in 2026, it's kind of funny to think the Irish, and more specifically Irish Catholics, were ever discriminated against in America, keep in mind that people considered it to be a big deal when JFK got elected, and that was 100 years later. And while it wouldn't be an understatement to say that Bill wasn't a huge fan of them,
On the seventh day the Lord rested, but before that he did, he squatted over the side of England, and what came out of him was Ireland. No offense, son.
He also surrounded himself with them, even making Amsterdam his protege. So is Bill actually a xenophobe or just a political opportunist? Well, the truth is he's probably a little bit of both, just like New York City. Let me explain. New York City in the 1860s, like today, was run exclusively by Democrats who, for the most part, were sympathetic to the South. Mostly due to the economic incentives of being a trading and banking hub that relied heavily on agricultural exports. Also, historically, the city had a major distrust of Washington, D.C., dating back to the country's founding when it was an anti-federalist stronghold. Not to mention, most of Tammany Hall's political power at that point relied heavily on persuading new immigrants to vote for Democratic candidates in exchange for jobs and other social welfare programs, which the film did a pretty good job of depicting. Another thing that was historically accurate was the draft riot. Because even though New York City was predominantly Democratic, it was still geographically located in the Union North. And by spring of 1863, the Union was losing badly. Which is why that March, Congress had to pass the first ever national draft. And just like in the movie, the only way to get a deferral was to pay $300. Which was equivalent to a year's wage for most laborers in the city. This only further fueled the depiction of the Republican Party as being controlled by nativist elites who were politically and financially incentivized to send poor immigrants to die and be replaced by freed slaves who they could get to work for even less money. So Lincoln's popularity, or lack thereof, in New York City was probably not much of an exaggeration. The irony, of course, was that a natives gang boss like Bill would be in cahoots with a Democratic Party boss like Tweed, who was comparatively pro-immigrant, even if only for purely political purposes. If I have any one real complaint about the movie, and I don't, I'm just kind of grasping at straws with this one, it would be more of an explanation as to why Bill and Tweed formed a political alliance in the first place. I get that from Bill's point of view that it was kind of impossible to have any sort of political influence in the city without Tammany's support. But what about Tweed? As far as I can tell, Bill only loosely controlled the 5 Points neighborhood through a pretty shaky alliance of rival gangs. And so what? It's only a few blocks in Lower Manhattan. Why is he important? I get that it's a drama, not a documentary, but Scorsese made the power balance between these two men seem very one-sided, favoring Bill, which in reality, it probably would have been the other way around, especially if Tweed controlled the loyalty of the Irish gangs, which, by many actual historical accounts, he did through bribery and patronage. I'm getting kind of sidetracked. I guess what I'm really trying to say about all this is, if Bill the Butcher was my favorite character in the film, Boss Tweed was a close second, so I paid extra close attention to that relationship. Which leads me to Leo. You would think I would have spent more time talking about his character, since he is arguably the main protagonist of the film. But to be perfectly honest, I just don't care that much. I don't think he did a bad job at all. And Marty certainly didn't. Look how many films he cast him in since. Aside from De Niro, I don't think any actor has worked with him more. But in the great scheme of things, 2002 was still pretty early into his career, which is crazy to say considering that The Gangs of New York was his 15th film. I mean, come on, he did freaking Titanic 5 years before that. And that may have been part of the problem. I bet a lot of the critics and general public still saw him as Jack Dawson. For lesser actors, you could certainly see how one could have been permanently typecasted in that role forever. I know Kate Winslet did other stuff after that, but does anyone really think of her as someone other than Rose? I don't. And the same could be said about Cameron Diaz. She didn't do a bad job at all, but like Leo, it was a pretty mid-performance from an A-list star. But I guess if you want to be snarky about it, you could say that she really isn't known for her acting chops as much as her good looks. Am I the only one who watched The Mask every day when I was 6 years old? What this film nailed more than anything, to use the parlance of our times, was a real vibe. The set design, props, wardrobe, and soundtrack really did a great job transporting you to a 19th century New York slum. You could practically smell it. Speaking of smells, don't you just love the smell of plastisol ink on a warm summer's eve? Here's the shirt I've been making throughout the video. If you're actually interested in seeing the process I use to screen print, it's not a traditional way of doing it, but it's a very low barrier to entry, both financially and skill-wise, for people who want to get into it. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. I'll probably do The Big Lebowski next. It'll be a good time.